in some cases for Vice President Harris and some for President Trump. So it's not just Democrats not wanting to negotiate. And in fact, we do want to negotiate. And that's why I'd encourage the president to encourage my colleagues on the Republican side to sit down with us and try to see if we can make some progress. Thank you. Thank you, Attorney General Bondi. I have noticed that at various times when one of my colleagues is pressing you, you come up with something in their background. So I'll be waiting for my turn, but you don't have to do it right now. So let me get to my questions. One of the things that you mentioned, and I agree with this, that it's really tough on the various federal workforce, including our law enforcement folks, who are not getting paid because of the shutdown. Mm-hmm. I agree with that. But I also think that wasn't the whole story. There is an issue here that's going to affect Americans, whether they voted for President Trump or voted for Vice President Harris, and that is the loss of health care, where on November 1st, everyone who is getting Affordable Care Act help to buy insurance is going to get the notice of premium increases. And I got a letter just today from a Vermont family, nuclear family of 5, husband and wife, 54 and 55, with 3 kids, one of whom has acute myeloid leukemia. And the apprehension that they have is that if we don't solve this problem, and November 1 is a urgent date, then their family premiums will triple. It'll be beyond their ability to pay. So I'm assuming that with respect to the threat to health care for families in your state of Florida, in my state of Vermont, you would share that concern and hope that we would resolve that.
Senator Welch, I would be happy to speak with that family too, because there are many nonprofits that help with children with terminal illnesses, and I'm involved in some in Florida. So we would be happy to talk to you about that. As to health care, the government is shut down. It's my understanding, maybe you're not one of them, but because many Democrats want health care for illegal aliens, and that's what shut down the government.
Let me
that's
be clear.
one of the sticking points, and I don't know if you voted
all right, well,
for that or not.
This actually is important to all of us, and the lament I have is that if this health care goes away, this premium support, it is really going to hurt families in red states and blue states. And in Vermont, I mean, we voted Democratic, but we have a lot of good folks who voted for President Trump, and their health care is jeopardized. And there's a November 1 deadline that is coming up. And the reason I'm saying this is that I think it's important for us to try to work out together a resolution that's going to be beneficial to people you care about in Florida and voted for President Trump, and people I care about in Vermont who voted in some cases for Vice President Harris and some for President Trump. So it's not just Democrats not wanting to negotiate. And in fact, we do want to negotiate, and that's why I'd encourage the president to encourage my colleagues on the Republican side to sit down with us and try to see if we can make some progress. Another topic, with the respective voting rights in the letter that your voting rights chief sent out, we got one in Vermont, and it's a demand to get all the information on the voting file. And in that letter, in the announcement of that letter, the chief indicated an apprehension about the voting process being taken over by, quote, the left. Now, do you have any information with respect to Vermont about a takeover of the voting process by, quote, the left?
Senator, I'm not familiar with what you're referring to. We are currently involved in voter roll lawsuits in 6 states. Is that what you're referring to?
No, there's a letter that went out demanding that states, including Vermont, provide all the voting file information,
right.
Includes personal information. But when that letter was sent out—
That's perfectly legal.
But there was an assertion by the chief in this division that this was to deal with the fact that the voting process has been taken over by the left. So we got one of those letters in Vermont. And my question to you is, what do you mean by the left? And do you have any evidence that the so-called system has been overtaken by the left?
We must have fair and free elections.
No, I know that. But I'm asking for the specific basis.
And we will have fair and free elections in this country.
Okay,
Senator, I'd be happy to talk to my chief. Who was it who said that?
It was your chief, which I assume you would know who that is. Here's the question here, okay? There is a point of view that is in dispute here about the fairness of elections. But you have the power as the as the Attorney General to use the authority of your office to make demands on states, and you did that with Vermont. That's within your right to do it. I'm not disputing your legal authority to do it.
Is Vermont disputing turning over the information to our office?
Vermont is, the Secretary of State is, and you can resolve that with her. But
and we have every right to have that information.
Yeah, here's
Senator.
where I'm going.
Why wouldn't they want to turn it over?
You're a prosecutor with the awesome authority to make the decision that you're going to start an investigation against the state or against an individual. And I know from your experience as a county prosecutor and as the Attorney General in Florida, you took seriously that obligation to have a factual basis before you'd proceed, right?
Senator, I take that role, I take my oath very seriously.
All right, so what I'm
and I
asking,
take fair and free elections in this country very seriously. And that information, our office is entitled to have that information. And we are involved in litigation on that, and I assume we'll be involved in litigation with Vermont.
We have a Republican governor in Vermont. We had our former Republican governor was secretary, was the treasurer for many years, and also the Secretary of State with election responsibility. What I'm asking is, do you or does your head of this voting section have any factual basis that you can point to that justifies your demand that Vermont turn over all this confidential voting rights information?
Well, it would remain confidential with my office, and you just said that you have a Republican governor, so it doesn't make sense what you just said. We've asked that of every state, Senator.
Right, and I'm asking about Vermont and what the factual basis is, but we can move on. You've mentioned that you can't discuss pending litigation, and I think the committee by and large accepted that answer. But I did notice that you spoke at great length about pending litigation, specifically with respect to the questions Senator Cruz asked you about the sentencing of the Kavanaugh defendant. That's pending, right?
He was sentenced to 8 years.
I understand that, but that's on appeal, right?
We will be appealing.
Right, so that makes it pending litigation. So you made an exception with respect to the Cruz questions.
Hold on. No,
but you didn't answer any of the questions that you said were pending litigation from any of my colleagues.
Those were facts that came out at the sentencing hearing. You're welcome to see the transcript of the sentencing hearing with all the gruesome details of what they threatened to do to Justice Kavanaugh and other justices.
I condemn what that person did.
That was the sentencing.
But the point here is that that's pending litigation. You indicated you're going to be appealing. It's your right to do that. And you would not, you use that justification to not answer many other questions.
Justification? You're an attorney, Senator.
Okay.
You realize that.
I do want to go back to Homan. You know, there's a tape, right, with Mr. Homan? I mean, first of all, is there a tape that has audio and video of the transfer of the $50,000?
You would have to talk to Director Patel about that.
No, I'm talking to you.
I don't know the answer, Senator.
Yeah, you do know the answer to that.
Don't call me a liar.
I didn't call you a liar.
You just said I know the answer. I said I don't know the answer.
Well,
you have to talk to Director Patel.
What
I said is that investigation
was closed. Let me put it another way. If you don't know, why don't you know whether there was a tape and video?
Senator, I believe that was resolved prior to my confirmation as Attorney General.
Do you think that it is of public interest for the people to know what happened to the 50 grand that the FBI turned over to Homan?
Did you hear what I just said? That was resolved prior to my confirmation as Attorney General. That's why I said I would not know.
It's not resolved. There's $50,000. Homan has it, or somebody has it. Do you have no interest in knowing where it is?
You're not going to sit here and slander Tom Homan. The FBI and Deputy Director Blanche said there was nothing.
I'm not slamming Tom Homan. He got the 50
Tom
grand.
Homan is doing, how do you know that? Tom Homan is doing a great job, as our borders are, keeping your border state safe. You're a border state.
This Senate exchange plays out like a slow-burning courtroom drama, where the tension isn't in what's said, but in what's carefully avoided. Senator Peter Welch approaches Attorney General Pam Bondi with questions that are grounded in concrete consequences for real people, yet the hearing steadily drifts into a familiar Washington fog where authority replaces clarity and framing replaces facts. What should have been a discussion about healthcare stability, election integrity, and federal accountability instead becomes a case study in how power deflects pressure without ever breaking eye contact. Welch begins with healthcare, and he does it deliberately. He acknowledges the hardship caused by the government shutdown on federal workers and law enforcement, but he insists that this isn't the full picture. The real crisis, he argues, is looming quietly in the background: the November 1 deadline tied to Affordable Care Act subsidies. If Congress fails to act, millions of Americans, regardless of how they vote, will receive notices that their insurance premiums are about to explode. To make the stakes impossible to ignore, he reads a letter from a Vermont family with 3 children, one of whom is battling acute myeloid leukemia. For them, a loss of subsidies doesn't mean inconvenience. It means financial and medical disaster. Welch's point is simple and old-fashioned in the best way. Government exists to prevent exactly this kind of harm. Bondi's response never directly touches that policy reality. Rather than addressing the subsidy deadline or the mechanics of preventing premium spikes, she pivots. She offers sympathy and mentions nonprofit organizations that help families with terminally ill children, which, while compassionate on the surface, sidesteps the structural problem entirely. Then she reframes the shutdown as a partisan fault line, claiming it exists because Democrats want health care for undocumented immigrants. The shift is sharp and intentional. The focus moves away from insured American families about to lose coverage and toward an immigration argument that energizes political bases but does nothing to resolve the immediate healthcare crisis Welch raised. When the discussion turns to voting rights, the temperature rises. Welch questions a Justice Department letter sent to Vermont demanding full voter file data, including sensitive personal information. What troubles him isn't merely the request itself, but the public justification given by the department's voting rights chief that these demands are necessary because the voting system has been taken over by the left. Welch presses for specifics, asking what evidence exists to support such a claim in Vermont. He emphasizes that Vermont has a Republican governor and a long history of bipartisan election administration, suggesting that sweeping ideological accusations without factual grounding are not just irresponsible, but dangerous when coming from the nation's top law enforcement office. Bondi's answers remain broad and procedural. She stresses that the department has legal authority to request the information, and that similar actions are being taken in multiple states. She repeats commitments to fair and free elections, but avoids defining who the left is or explaining what concrete misconduct Vermont is accused of. Welch's concern is fundamentally prosecutorial. Power without evidence erodes trust. As a former prosecutor himself, he underscores the idea that investigations should begin with facts, not assumptions, and that federal authority carries an obligation to be precise, not ideological. Welch then exposes what he sees as an inconsistency in Bondi's approach to pending litigation. Throughout the hearing, she repeatedly refuses to answer questions on the grounds that cases are ongoing. Yet earlier, she spoke at length about a case involving threats against Justice Kavanaugh in response to questions from Senator Cruz. Welch notes that the case is still on appeal, meaning it is, by definition, pending litigation. The implication hangs in the air. The rule about silence seems elastic, applied strictly in some cases and loosely in others, depending on political alignment rather than legal necessity. The hearing reaches its most volatile moment when Welch asks about a $50,000 transfer involving the FBI and Tom Homan. Bondi claims she does not know the details and says the issue was resolved before she took office. When Welch suggests that the public has a legitimate interest in knowing what happened to the money, Bondi bristles. Her tone sharpens. She accuses him of slander, and the exchange spirals into a defense of Homan and border enforcement. The original factual question, where the money went and who is accountable, never receives a clear answer, swallowed instead by indignation and political loyalty. By the end of the exchange, what's most striking is not any single unanswered question, but the pattern that emerges. Welch consistently asks for evidence, specificity, and consistency. Bondi consistently responds with authority, generalities, and reframing. Healthcare becomes immigration. Oversight becomes hostility. Questions become accusations. It's a reminder that in modern politics, the battle isn't always over policy outcomes. It's over who controls the story, who defines the problem, and who gets to decide when facts are optional. Old traditions of accountability collide with modern partisan instincts, and the clash leaves more unresolved than revealed.